the psychology of greed, unmasking the insatiable hunger. In the grand tapestry of human experience, few threads are as pervasive, as deeply woven into the fabric of our societies, and yet as profoundly misunderstood as the phenomenon of greed. It whispers in the boardrooms of multinational corporations, echoes in the clamor of bustling marketplaces, and often, subtly, insidiously, resonates within the quiet chambers of our own hearts. We see its manifestations everywhere. The relentless pursuit of wealth beyond any conceivable need, the insatiable craving for power that corrupts even the noblest intentions, the desperate accumulation of possessions that promise fulfillment but deliver only fleeting satisfaction. But what truly is this force that drives us to perpetually seek more, even when enough has long been surpassed? Greed, at its core, is not merely a strong desire. Desire, in its healthy form, propels innovation, fuels ambition, and drives progress. It is the yearning for improvement, for growth, for a better life. But greed transcends this healthy aspiration, morphing into an excessive, insatiable craving for more than is needed or deserved. It is a hunger that, paradoxically, grows with feeding, leaving its host in a perpetual state of want, a void that no amount of acquisition can ever truly fill. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as a selfish and excessive desire for more of something, such as money, than is needed. 1. The key word here is excessive, a subtle yet profound distinction that separates healthy ambition from a destructive obsession. Consider the paradox that lies at the heart of greed. The relentless pursuit of more often leads not to contentment, but to an ever-deepening sense of dissatisfaction. Why do individuals, having amassed fortunes beyond their wildest dreams, continue to chase further riches with the same fervor as those struggling for basic necessities? Why does the acquisition of power, once achieved, often lead to a craving for absolute control, even at the cost of personal integrity and human connection? This fundamental contradiction, that the very act of seeking boundless accumulation can lead to an inverse experience of fulfillment, is one of the most compelling mysteries of the human psyche. It suggests that greed is not a pathway to happiness, but rather a psychological trap, a labyrinth from which escape seems increasingly difficult with each turn. This video embarks on a deep dive into the multifaceted nature of greed, peeling back its layers to expose its psychological, biological, and societal underpinnings. We will journey through history and philosophy to understand how different eras and cultures have grappled with this powerful human impulse. We will explore the intricate neurological pathways that light up with the promise of gain and the cognitive biases that blind us to its pitfalls. We will confront the societal structures that inadvertently foster its growth and examine its devastating consequences on both individual well-being and the collective human experience. Ultimately, we seek to understand not just what greed is, but why it persists, and whether humanity can ever truly redefine its relationship with the elusive concept of enough. #2. Historical and philosophical roots of greed. The concept of greed is far from a modern invention. Its shadow stretches back to the dawn of human civilization, casting a long, often condemnatory, gaze across the annals of history and philosophy. From ancient texts to contemporary critiques, the human struggle with insatiable desire has been a recurring theme, shaping moral codes, religious doctrines, and economic theories. Understanding these historical and philosophical perspectives is crucial to grasping the enduring complexity of greed. In ancient philosophy, particularly in the Hellenic world, greed was largely viewed as a profound vice, a distortion of the soul that led to imbalance and unhappiness. Plato, in his Republic, implicitly addresses greed through his discussion of the tripartite soul, where the appetitive part, if unchecked, can lead to an insatiable desire for material possessions and sensory pleasures, disrupting the harmony of the individual and the state too. For Plato, justice in the individual and society stemmed from a proper ordering of these parts, with reason guiding the appetites. An excessive focus on accumulation, therefore, was a sign of a disordered soul. Aristotle, a student of Plato, further elaborated on this, viewing greed or pleonexia, meaning the desire to have more, as a form of injustice. He argued that virtue lies in the mean, and greed, by its very nature, represents an excess, a deviation from moderation. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle emphasized that the greedy person seeks gain not for the sake of a good life, but for gain itself, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of true human flourishing. 3. The Stoics, 2, condemned greed, advocating for a life of virtue and indifference to external possessions, recognizing that attachment to material wealth inevitably leads to suffering and disturbance of the inner peace. 4. Religious texts across diverse traditions have consistently cast greed in a negative light, often elevating it to the status of a cardinal sin or a significant impediment to spiritual enlightenment. In Christianity, avarice is one of the 7 deadly sins, explicitly warned against in numerous biblical passages. The New Testament, in particular, frequently cautions against the love of money, stating that it is a root of all kinds of evil, 1 Timothy 6 verse 10, and that one cannot serve both God and money, Matthew 6 verse 24. 5. The Quran also condemns excessive accumulation of wealth and encourages charity and moderation, viewing greed as a barrier to spiritual purity and social justice. 6. Similarly, in Buddhism, greed, lobha, is identified as one of the 3 poisons, alongside hatred and delusion, that bind beings to the cycle of suffering, samsara, emphasizing detachment from material desires as a path to liberation. 7. These religious perspectives underscore a universal recognition of greed's destructive potential, not just for the individual's soul, but for the moral fabric of society. The Enlightenment period, however, introduced a significant shift in the perception of greed, particularly with the rise of economic liberalism and the philosophy of capitalism. Thinkers like Adam Smith, often misconstrued, argued in The Wealth of Nations that individuals pursuing their own self-interest, guided by an invisible hand, could inadvertently contribute to the greater good of society. 8. While Smith did not explicitly endorse greed, his ideas laid the groundwork for a system where the pursuit of profit, a close cousin to greed, became a primary driver of economic activity and innovation. This marked a departure from earlier moral condemnations, reframing self-interest, and by extension, certain aspects of acquisitiveness, as potentially beneficial for societal progress. This intellectual evolution transformed greed from a purely moral failing into a complex economic and social phenomenon, prompting ongoing debates about its role in prosperity and inequality. In contemporary thought, the discussion around greed continues to evolve, often grappling with the tension between its potential as a motivator for achievement and its undeniable capacity for destruction. Modern interpretations frequently acknowledge the psychological underpinnings of greed, moving beyond simplistic moral judgments to explore its roots in human nature, neurobiology, and societal conditioning. This nuanced view recognizes that while unchecked greed can lead to devastating consequences, the desire for improvement and growth, when channeled ethically, can be a powerful force for positive change. The challenge lies in discerning the fine line between healthy ambition and destructive avarice, a distinction that remains central to understanding the psychology of greed in the 21st century. #3. The psychological landscape of greed. Having traversed the historical and philosophical terrains of greed, we now delve into its intricate psychological landscape. This is where the abstract concept of insatiable desire takes on concrete forms, revealing the inner workings of the human mind that perpetuate the endless quest for more. What are the psychological mechanisms that transform a healthy desire into a destructive obsession? What are the underlying vulnerabilities and cognitive distortions that fuel this relentless pursuit? #A. Defining greed, desire versus insatiability. To truly understand the psychology of greed, we must first refine our definition. As established, greed is not merely a strong desire. Desire, in its fundamental form, is a natural and often necessary component of human existence. It drives us to seek food when hungry, warmth when cold, connection when lonely. It motivates us to learn, to create, to improve our circumstances. This healthy desire is finite. It can be satisfied, at least temporarily. Once a need is met, the desire for it subsides, allowing for a state of contentment or the emergence of new, equally healthy desires. Greed, however, is characterized by its insatiability. It is a desire that, even when fulfilled, immediately reasserts itself, often with increased intensity. It's a hunger that grows with eating, a thirst that deepens with drinking. This perpetual dissatisfaction, this inability to experience true satiation, is the hallmark of psychological greed. It's the difference between wanting a comfortable home and wanting an ever larger mansion, between seeking financial security and pursuing boundless wealth, between desiring influence and craving absolute dominion. The object of greed, whether money, power, or possessions, becomes a means to an end that is never reached, a mirage of fulfillment that recedes with every step taken towards it. ####B. Underlying motivations. The shadows that feed the hunger. The roots of this insatiable hunger are often buried deep within the human psyche, nurtured by a complex interplay of personal history, emotional vulnerabilities, and social conditioning. Greed rarely exists in a vacuum. It is frequently a symptom of deeper, unresolved psychological needs. #####1. Insecurity and lack. Filling emotional voids. One of the most potent drivers of greed is a profound sense of insecurity or a history of perceived lack. Individuals who have experienced material deprivation in childhood, or perhaps more subtly, emotional neglect, may develop a psychological hunger that abundance can never truly satisfy. Like someone who survived a famine and continues to hoard food despite having plenty, their past experiences program them to perpetually seek and accumulate, as if preparing for an inevitable future scarcity. This accumulation becomes a defense mechanism against the deep-seated fear of not having enough, a desperate attempt to fill an internal void with external possessions. The irony, of course, is that this external accumulation rarely addresses the internal emptiness, leading to a vicious cycle of wanting more. #####2. Envy and social comparison, the relentless race. Humans are inherently social creatures, and our sense of self is often shaped by comparison to others. This innate tendency, when coupled with a culture that emphasizes material success and outward displays of wealth, can easily morph into envy, a powerful catalyst for greed. When we constantly compare our possessions, status, or achievements to those of our peers, neighbors, or even idealized figures in media, a feeling of inadequacy can arise. This feeling then fuels a relentless drive to acquire what others have, or even more, in a desperate attempt to keep up or surpass them. The focus shifts from personal needs and genuine well-being to an external scorecard, where the value of what one possesses is determined not by its utility or intrinsic worth, but by its comparative superiority. This social comparison trap ensures that the finish line of enough is constantly moving, always just beyond reach, as there will always be someone with more. #####3. Unmet emotional needs. Greed as a coping mechanism. Greed can also serve as a maladaptive coping mechanism for unresolved emotional pain, trauma, or deep-seated psychological distress. In a world that often prioritizes material success, the acquisition of wealth or power can become a substitute for genuine emotional fulfillment. The thrill of the chase, the temporary high of a new acquisition, or the perceived validation that comes with status can momentarily distract from feelings of loneliness, anxiety, inadequacy, or depression. However, like any addiction, this relief is fleeting, requiring ever-increasing doses of acquisition to maintain the illusion of well-being. The underlying emotional needs remain unmet, leading to a perpetual cycle where external gains are sought to soothe internal wounds, a strategy that ultimately proves futile. ####4. Power and control, the illusion of mastery. Beyond material possessions, greed often manifests as an insatiable desire for power and control. For some, this stems from a deep-seated need to overcome feelings of helplessness or vulnerability experienced earlier in life. Amassing power, whether over individuals, organizations, or resources, can create an illusion of invincibility and mastery over one's environment. This drive for control can be particularly potent in individuals who harbor a fear of being controlled or exploited by others. The more power they accumulate, the more secure they feel, yet this security is often fragile, leading to a constant need to expand their sphere of influence, even at the expense of others' autonomy and well-being. The pursuit of power, like the pursuit of wealth, becomes an endless game, as true control over life's inherent uncertainties remains an elusive fantasy. ####C. Cognitive biases and decision-making, the mind's deceptive mirrors. Our minds, while incredibly powerful, are also prone to systematic errors in thinking, known as cognitive biases. These biases can significantly distort our perception of reality, leading us to make irrational decisions that perpetuate greedy behaviors. They act as deceptive mirrors, reflecting back a distorted image that justifies and reinforces the insatiable pursuit of more. Confirmation bias, the echo chamber of desire. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. In the context of greed, this means that individuals driven by acquisitive desires will actively seek out information that supports their pursuit of wealth or power, while dismissing or ignoring evidence that contradicts it. They might focus on success stories of billionaires, rationalize unethical business practices, or selectively recall instances where their aggressive pursuit of gain paid off. This creates an echo chamber of self-reinforcement, making it incredibly difficult to recognize the destructive nature of their own greed, as their minds are constantly filtering reality to confirm their chosen path. #####2. Loss aversion, the fear of losing what one has. Loss aversion is a powerful cognitive bias where the pain of losing something is psychologically more powerful than the pleasure of gaining an equivalent amount. For greedy individuals, this bias can manifest as an intense fear of losing their accumulated wealth, status, or power. This fear then drives them to acquire even more, not necessarily for the pleasure of new gains, but to create a larger buffer against potential losses. The idea of enough becomes impossible because any amount can theoretically be lost, leading to a perpetual need to expand their holdings. This bias can also lead to irrational risk-taking, as individuals might gamble significant assets in a desperate attempt to avoid a perceived loss, even if the odds are stacked against them. #####3. Sunk cost fallacy, the irreversible investment. The sunk cost fallacy describes our tendency to continue investing in a failing endeavor because of the resources, time, money, effort already invested. In the context of greed, this means that individuals might continue to pursue a destructive path of accumulation simply because they have already invested so much into it. The thought of abandoning their pursuit, even if it's clearly leading to negative consequences, feels like a waste of all their past efforts. This fallacy traps them in a cycle of escalating commitment, where each new acquisition or risky venture is justified by the previous ones, making it incredibly difficult to disengage from the greedy pursuit. ####4. Overconfidence, the illusion of invincibility. Overconfidence bias is the tendency to overestimate one's own abilities, knowledge, and judgment. Greedy individuals often exhibit a heightened sense of overconfidence, believing themselves to be smarter, more capable, or more deserving than others. This can lead them to take excessive risks, dismiss warnings, and believe they are immune to the negative consequences that befall others. They might engage in unethical practices, convinced they won't be caught, or make reckless financial decisions, certain they will succeed where others have failed. This inflated self-perception blinds them to their own vulnerabilities and the potential for catastrophic outcomes, further entrenching their greedy behaviors. ####D. The role of dopamine and reward systems, the neurobiology of craving. Beneath the layers of psychological motivations and cognitive biases lies the intricate neurobiological machinery of the brain, particularly its reward system, which plays a crucial role in the perpetuation of greed. At the heart of this system is dopamine, a neurotransmitter often associated with pleasure, but more accurately linked to motivation, desire, and the anticipation of reward. When we anticipate a gain, whether it's money, power, or a new possession, our brain's reward pathways, particularly those involving the ventral tegmental area (VTA) and the nucleus accumbens, release dopamine. This surge of dopamine creates a powerful feeling of craving and motivation, driving us to pursue the anticipated reward. The problem with greed is that this dopamine rush is primarily associated with the anticipation and acquisition of the reward, rather than its sustained possession. The moment of acquisition provides a brief peak, but the levels quickly return to baseline, leaving the individual craving the next hit. This creates a neurochemical loop. The more one acquires, the more the brain becomes accustomed to these dopamine surges, leading to a need for ever greater or more frequent acquisitions to achieve the same level of activation. This is strikingly similar to the mechanisms underlying addiction, where the brain's reward system becomes rewired to prioritize the pursuit of the addictive substance or behavior. Furthermore, studies have shown that the brains of highly greedy individuals may exhibit altered activity in areas associated with risk-taking and self-control, such as the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. This can lead to a reduced ability to regulate impulsive desires and a heightened sensitivity to potential gains, even when those gains come at the expense of others or involve significant risks. The neurobiological underpinnings of greed suggest that it is not merely a moral failing, but a complex interplay of psychological vulnerabilities, cognitive distortions, and the powerful, sometimes deceptive, machinery of our own brains. Understanding this interplay is crucial for developing strategies to mitigate its destructive effects and foster a more balanced relationship with our desires. #4. The evolutionary perspective. Is greed innate? The question of whether greed is an inherent part of human nature or a product of cultural conditioning has long fascinated philosophers and scientists alike. From an evolutionary standpoint, certain aspects of what we now define as greed might have conferred survival advantages in ancestral environments, suggesting a deep-seated, perhaps even innate, predisposition towards accumulation. #A. Survival instincts, hoarding resources in times of scarcity. For much of human history, our ancestors lived in environments characterized by scarcity and unpredictable resources. Food, shelter, and other vital necessities were not always readily available, and periods of abundance were often followed by lean times. In such conditions, individuals who possessed a strong drive to acquire and hoard resources, whether food, tools, or even social alliances, would have had a distinct advantage. The ability to accumulate reserves would increase their chances of survival during periods of famine or hardship, and thus this acquisitive tendency would have been favored by natural selection. From this perspective, the impulse to gather more than immediate needs dictate can be seen as a deeply ingrained survival mechanism, a relic of a time when more genuinely meant a higher probability of living to see another day. #B. Reproductive success. Accumulation as a signal of fitness. Beyond mere survival, the accumulation of resources could also have played a significant role in reproductive success. In many species, and certainly in early human societies, the ability to acquire and control resources was directly linked to an individual's attractiveness as a mate and their capacity to provide for offspring. A male who could consistently secure more food, better shelter, or more valuable tools would be perceived as more capable and resourceful, thus increasing his chances of attracting a mate and ensuring the survival and flourishing of his progeny. Similarly, a female who could manage and protect resources effectively would also be highly valued. This evolutionary pressure could have reinforced the drive to accumulate, as it served as a tangible signal of fitness and a means to pass on one's genes to the next generation. In this context, greed, or at least a strong acquisitive drive, could be viewed as an adaptive trait that contributed to the propagation of the species. Group versus individual greed. The tension between cooperation and self-interest. The evolutionary narrative of greed is not, however, a simple story of individual self-interest. Humans are also highly social creatures, and cooperation has been equally, if not more, crucial for our survival and success as a species. Early human groups relied on cooperation for hunting, gathering, defense, and raising offspring. This creates a fascinating tension. While individual greed might have offered personal advantages, unchecked greed could undermine the very fabric of the group, leading to conflict, distrust, and ultimately, the collapse of cooperative endeavors. Evolutionary psychologists propose that our species developed mechanisms to balance these competing drives. For instance, social norms, moral codes, and the capacity for empathy and altruism might have evolved as counterweights to excessive individual greed, ensuring that the benefits of cooperation were maintained. The evolution of self-interest, therefore, is intricately linked with the evolution of our capacity for altruism and social cohesion. #D. The evolution of selfishness versus altruism. This tension between individual gain and group well-being is a central theme in evolutionary biology. While a purely selfish individual might thrive in the short term by exploiting others, a group composed entirely of such individuals would likely collapse. Conversely, a group with a strong cooperative ethos, where individuals are willing to share and even sacrifice for the common good, would be more resilient and successful in the long run. Evolutionary models suggest that both selfish and altruistic traits can persist within a population, depending on environmental conditions and the specific dynamics of social interaction. Greed, in this context, can be seen as an extreme manifestation of self-interest, a drive that, while potentially adaptive in certain narrow circumstances, can become maladaptive when it undermines the cooperative structures essential for complex human societies. The ongoing debate about the extent to which greed is an innate human trait versus a culturally amplified behavior continues to shape our understanding of human nature and the potential for societal change. #V Greed in society and culture. While the evolutionary roots of acquisitive behavior might be ancient, the manifestation and intensity of greed are profoundly shaped by the societal structures and cultural values in which individuals are embedded. Our modern world, in particular, presents a complex interplay of systems and narratives that can either temper or amplify the human propensity for more. #A Economic systems, capitalism and the promotion of self-interest. Perhaps no other economic system has been as closely associated with greed as capitalism. Rooted in the principles of free markets, competition, and the pursuit of profit, capitalism, at its theoretical best, posits that individual self-interest, when channeled through competitive markets, leads to collective prosperity. As Adam Smith famously articulated, the butcher, the brewer, and the baker provide our dinner not from benevolence, but from their regard to their own interest. This framework, while undeniably driving unprecedented innovation and wealth creation, also creates an environment where the relentless pursuit of accumulation is not just tolerated, but often celebrated as a virtue. The metrics of success within capitalist societies, net worth, market share, quarterly profits, are inherently quantitative and often encourage a mindset of endless growth, regardless of its social or environmental costs. The financial sector, in particular, has often been critiqued as a breeding ground for excessive greed, where the pursuit of ever larger bonuses and speculative gains can lead to systemic risks and ethical compromises. Consumerism and materialism, the endless cycle of wanting and buying. Hand in hand with capitalism, consumerism has become a dominant cultural force, particularly in developed nations. Consumerism is the preoccupation with the acquisition of consumer goods, and it actively cultivates and exploits the human tendency towards materialism, the belief that possessions and material comfort are the most important things in life. Through sophisticated advertising and marketing, a constant stream of new products is presented as essential for happiness, status, and self-worth. This creates an endless cycle of wanting and buying, where the fleeting satisfaction of acquisition quickly gives way to the desire for the next new thing. The psychological impact is profound. Individuals are conditioned to believe that external possessions can fill internal voids, leading to a perpetual state of dissatisfaction and a heightened susceptibility to greedy impulses. The message is clear. You are what you own, and more is always better. #C Corporate greed, ethical implications, and societal impact. When the pursuit of profit becomes unmoored from ethical considerations, corporate greed can have devastating societal consequences. This manifests in various forms: exploitative labor practices, environmental degradation, financial fraud, and the prioritization of shareholder value over employee well-being or public safety. The drive for maximizing profits, often fueled by executive compensation tied to short-term gains, can lead to a systemic disregard for ethical boundaries. High-profile corporate scandals, from Enron to the subprime mortgage crisis, serve as stark reminders of how unchecked corporate greed can destabilize economies, erode public trust, and inflict widespread suffering. The pursuit of limitless growth in a finite world inevitably clashes with the principles of sustainability and social justice, highlighting the urgent need for greater accountability and ethical governance. #D Political greed, corruption and abuse of power. Greed is not confined to the economic sphere. It permeates the corridors of power, manifesting as political greed. This involves the abuse of public office for personal gain, whether through bribery, embezzlement, nepotism, or the manipulation of policies to benefit oneself or one's cronies. Political greed erodes public trust, undermines democratic institutions, and diverts resources away from public services, exacerbating inequality and hindering development. It transforms governance from a service to the common good into a vehicle for personal enrichment, leading to widespread corruption and a sense of disillusionment among citizens. The insatiable desire for power, once attained, can also lead to authoritarian tendencies, as leaders seek to consolidate control to protect their ill-gotten gains or to satisfy an ever-growing appetite for dominance. ####E Cultural narratives. How different cultures perceive and address greed. While greed appears to be a universal human potential, different cultures have developed diverse narratives and mechanisms to perceive, regulate, and even celebrate or condemn it. Understanding these cultural contrasts provides valuable insights into alternative ways of relating to material possessions and ambition. For example, Japanese culture offers the concept of wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in imperfection, transience, and simplicity. This aesthetic and philosophical worldview stands in stark contrast to the consumerist drive for endless acquisition and flawless newness. It encourages contentment with what is, rather than a constant yearning for what is not, thereby acting as a cultural antidote to materialistic greed. 9. Similarly, the Nordic concept of lagom translates roughly to just enough or in moderation. It embodies a cultural value of balance, sufficiency, and avoiding excess in all aspects of life, from consumption to work-life balance. This cultural emphasis on moderation helps to temper acquisitive impulses and fosters a sense of collective well-being over individual accumulation. 10. In many indigenous cultures, communal ownership and reciprocal relationships are prioritized over individual accumulation. Resources are often viewed as belonging to the community or even to the earth itself, to be shared and managed for the benefit of all, including future generations. This contrasts sharply with Western notions of private property and unlimited growth, offering models where the inherent human drive to acquire is channeled towards collective sustenance rather than individual hoarding. These cultural alternatives remind us that the never-enough mentality is not an inevitable human condition, but rather a product of specific cultural and economic conditioning. They offer powerful counter-narratives and practical approaches to fostering a more balanced and sustainable relationship with our desires and the world around us. The dark side of greed, consequences, and pathologies. Having explored the psychological, evolutionary, and societal drivers of greed, it is imperative to confront its darker manifestations, the profound and often devastating consequences it inflicts upon individuals and the collective. Greed, when unchecked, ceases to be a mere desire and transforms into a pathology, eroding well-being, fracturing relationships, and destabilizing the very foundations of society. The pursuit of an endless more often leads to a profound less in terms of human flourishing. Individual consequences, the self-inflicted wounds. The individual caught in the relentless grip of greed often finds themselves trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by material abundance, but experiencing an acute poverty of spirit. The promised satisfaction of acquisition remains perpetually elusive, leading to a cascade of negative psychological and emotional states. Mental health, anxiety, depression, dissatisfaction, and emptiness. Perhaps the most insidious consequence of unchecked greed is its corrosive effect on mental well-being. The constant striving for more, the perpetual comparison with others, and the fear of losing what has been accumulated create a fertile ground for anxiety. The greedy individual is rarely at peace. Their mind is constantly preoccupied with future gains or past losses, unable to rest in the present moment. This relentless mental agitation can escalate into chronic stress, leading to exhaustion and burnout. Research consistently shows a negative correlation between materialism and life satisfaction, with individuals prioritizing wealth and possessions reporting higher levels of depression and anxiety despite their material gains. 11. The paradox is stark. The very pursuit intended to bring happiness often delivers its antithesis, leaving a deep sense of dissatisfaction and an existential emptiness that no amount of external acquisition can fill. The thrill of the chase is fleeting, and the moment of acquisition provides only a transient dopamine hit, quickly followed by a return to baseline, or even lower, leaving a craving for the next fix. Relationship strain, isolation, distrust, and exploitation. Greed is inherently self-centered, and its focus on personal gain inevitably comes at the expense of genuine human connection. Relationships, which thrive on reciprocity, empathy, and shared values, wither under the shadow of avarice. The greedy individual often views others not as fellow human beings, but as means to an end, tools to be exploited, competitors to be vanquished, or obstacles to be overcome. This instrumentalization of relationships leads to a profound sense of isolation, as trust erodes and authentic bonds become impossible. Family members may be neglected, friends alienated, and partners viewed as extensions of one's own acquisitive projects. The pursuit of wealth or power often demands sacrifices of time, attention, and emotional investment that should rightfully be directed towards loved ones, leaving a trail of broken connections and profound loneliness. Is the vastness of a fortune truly worth the emptiness of a life lived in isolation, devoid of genuine affection and camaraderie? #3. Ethical erosion, compromising values and engaging in illicit activities. The insatiable desire for more often leads to a gradual, almost imperceptible erosion of ethical boundaries. What begins as minor compromises can escalate into outright deception, fraud, and even illegal activities. When the perceived reward is sufficiently high, the greedy mind can rationalize almost any action, bending moral principles to fit the narrative of personal gain. The ends begin to justify the means, and the pursuit of wealth or power becomes an amoral imperative. This ethical decay not only damages the individual's integrity, but also has far-reaching consequences for the institutions and systems they inhabit, fostering a culture of corruption and distrust. The line between ambition and avarice blurs, and the individual finds themselves on a slippery slope where their conscience is increasingly silenced by the siren song of more. Addiction. Greed as a behavioral addiction. Increasingly, psychologists and neuroscientists are recognizing the striking parallels between pathological greed and behavioral addictions. Just as an individual can become addicted to gambling, drugs, or even work, the relentless pursuit of wealth, power, or possessions can become an addictive cycle. The brain's reward pathways, particularly those involving dopamine, are activated by the anticipation and acquisition of gain, creating a powerful, self-reinforcing loop. This can lead to compulsive behaviors, an inability to stop despite negative consequences, and a preoccupation with the object of their greed. The insatiable nature of greed, the constant craving for the next hit of acquisition, and the withdrawal-like symptoms, anxiety, irritability, when denied, all point to its addictive potential. This perspective shifts greed from a purely moral failing to a complex psychological condition that requires understanding and intervention, much like any other addiction. 12. Societal consequences. The collective burden. The individual pathologies of greed, when aggregated and amplified by systemic structures, coalesce into profound societal ills. Unchecked greed does not merely harm the individual. It corrodes the collective well-being, exacerbates inequalities, and threatens the very sustainability of our planet. #1. Inequality and social unrest. Perhaps the most visible and destabilizing consequence of widespread greed is the dramatic increase in wealth and income inequality. When a small segment of society accumulates vast fortunes at the expense of others, resources become concentrated, opportunities diminish for the majority, and the gap between the rich and the poor widens into a chasm. This extreme disparity breeds resentment, frustration, and a sense of injustice among those left behind. Historically, such conditions have been potent catalysts for social unrest, political instability, and even violent revolutions. The insatiable desire of a few for more can directly translate into the systemic deprivation of many, creating a volatile social environment where the bonds of community fray and the promise of a fair society seems like a cruel illusion. Hashtag 2. Environmental degradation. The relentless pursuit of economic growth and material accumulation, often driven by corporate and individual greed, places immense and unsustainable pressure on the planet's finite resources. The desire for ever-increasing profits leads to the exploitation of natural environments, deforestation, pollution of air and water, and the depletion of non-renewable resources. The short-term gains prioritized by greedy endeavors often disregard the long-term ecological consequences, pushing planetary systems to their breaking point. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource scarcity are not merely scientific problems. They are, in large part, symptoms of a global economic system fueled by an insatiable appetite for more without regard for the ecological limits of our shared home. The paradox here is that the very planet that provides the resources for accumulation is being systematically destroyed by the very act of excessive accumulation. Hashtag 3. Financial crises. History is replete with examples of financial crises triggered by speculative bubbles, reckless risk-taking, and unethical practices, all hallmarks of unchecked greed within the financial sector. The pursuit of quick, enormous profits, often through complex and opaque financial instruments, can lead to systemic instability. When individuals and institutions prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability and ethical conduct, the entire economic system becomes vulnerable. The 2008 global financial crisis, for instance, was widely attributed to a culture of excessive risk-taking and greed within the banking industry, leading to widespread foreclosures, job losses, and a global recession. These crises demonstrate how the concentrated greed of a few can have catastrophic ripple effects, impacting the lives and livelihoods of millions, highlighting the interconnectedness of our economic fates and the destructive power of unchecked avarice. Hashtag 7. Overcoming the grip of greed. The preceding sections have painted a stark picture of greed's pervasive influence and its destructive consequences, both for the individual and for society. Yet, the human spirit is not condemned to an endless cycle of insatiable wanting. Just as greed is a learned and reinforced behavior, so too can its grip be loosened and a more balanced, fulfilling relationship with our desires cultivated. This requires a conscious effort, a reorientation of values, and the cultivation of practices that foster contentment, connection, and genuine well-being. Hashtag A. Self-awareness and reflection, recognizing the shadow. The first and most crucial step in overcoming greed is to recognize its presence within oneself. Greed often operates subtly, disguised as ambition, prudence, or even a legitimate desire for security. It can be difficult to distinguish between a healthy drive for improvement and an insatiable craving for more. Self-awareness, cultivated through introspection and honest self-assessment, allows us to identify the moments when desire crosses the line into excess. Asking probing questions. Why do I want this? What void am I trying to fill? Will this truly bring lasting satisfaction, or just a fleeting high? Can illuminate the underlying motivations. Journaling, meditation, and seeking feedback from trusted individuals can also serve as powerful tools for uncovering the hidden manifestations of greed and understanding its personal triggers. Only by acknowledging the shadow can we begin to integrate it and move towards a more conscious relationship with our acquisitive impulses. Cultivating gratitude, shifting focus from lack to abundance. Greed thrives on a perception of lack, a constant focus on what one does not have. Gratitude, conversely, is a powerful antidote, shifting our attention to the abundance that already exists in our lives. Regular practice of gratitude, whether through daily journaling, expressing appreciation to others, or simply taking moments to acknowledge blessings, rewires the brain to focus on positive experiences and existing resources. This reorientation diminishes the perceived need for more, fostering a sense of contentment and sufficiency. When we genuinely appreciate what we have, the allure of endless acquisition begins to wane. It is a profound shift from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance, transforming the internal landscape from one of perpetual wanting to one of quiet satisfaction. C. Practicing mindfulness, observing desires without acting. Mindfulness, the practice of being present and fully aware of the current moment without judgment, offers a potent tool for disengaging from the compulsive cycle of greedy impulses. Instead of automatically reacting to every desire, mindfulness creates a space between the impulse and the action. Through mindful observation, we can witness the arising of desires, the craving for a new possession, the urge for more power, without immediately being swept away by them. This allows for a critical examination. Is this desire truly serving my well-being? Is it aligned with my deeper values? Or is it merely a fleeting urge driven by external conditioning or internal insecurity? By cultivating this space, we gain the freedom to choose our response, to consciously decide whether to pursue a desire or to let it pass, thereby weakening the automatic grip of greed. It is a practice of non-attachment, not to possessions themselves, but to the compulsive need for them. #D. Embracing intrinsic values, prioritizing connection and growth. One of the core insights from the psychology of well-being is the distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic values. Extrinsic values, such as wealth, fame, and image, are often associated with external rewards and social validation. Intrinsic values, on the other hand, are inherently satisfying and include personal growth, meaningful relationships, community contribution, and physical health. Greed is primarily driven by extrinsic values, which research shows are often associated with lower levels of happiness and higher levels of anxiety and depression. By consciously shifting our focus and prioritizing intrinsic values, we cultivate sources of fulfillment that are not dependent on external acquisition. Investing time and energy in nurturing genuine relationships, pursuing personal development, contributing to a cause larger than oneself, or engaging in activities that bring joy and meaning, provides a deep and sustainable sense of satisfaction that the endless pursuit of material gain can never offer. This reorientation of values is a fundamental step towards liberating oneself from the tyranny of more. #E. The power of generosity, finding fulfillment in giving. Greed is characterized by taking and accumulating. Generosity, its direct antithesis, is about giving and sharing. The act of giving, whether of time, resources, or compassion, has been consistently shown to activate the brain's reward centers, often more powerfully than receiving. This phenomenon, sometimes referred to as the helper's high, demonstrates that our brains are wired for prosocial behavior. By actively practicing generosity, we directly challenge the self-centered logic of greed. It fosters empathy, strengthens social bonds, and cultivates a sense of interconnectedness. Giving creates a virtuous cycle. The more we give, the more fulfilled we feel, and the less we are driven by the need to accumulate for ourselves. It is a powerful reassertion of our shared humanity and a direct pathway to experiencing true abundance, not in what we possess, but in what we share. Redefining enough, a philosophical and practical approach to contentment. Perhaps the most profound shift in overcoming greed lies in redefining our concept of enough. In a consumerist society, the goalposts of sufficiency are constantly moving, driven by advertising, social comparison, and the relentless pursuit of the next best thing. To counter this, we must consciously and deliberately define what enough means for ourselves, not as a ceiling on ambition, but as a foundation for contentment. This involves distinguishing between needs and wants, recognizing the point of diminishing returns in acquisition, and embracing a philosophy of sufficiency. It's about understanding that true wealth is not measured by the size of one's portfolio or possessions, but by the richness of one's experiences, relationships, and inner peace. Practically, this might involve setting clear financial goals that prioritize security and freedom over excessive accumulation, decluttering one's life to reduce material attachments, and consciously opting out of the endless consumption cycle. Redefining enough is an act of liberation, freeing us from the endless treadmill of desire and allowing us to savor the present moment and the true riches it holds. #8. Conclusion. A call for balance and conscious living. We have journeyed through the intricate landscape of greed, from its ancient philosophical condemnations to its modern psychological and neurobiological underpinnings. We have seen how this insatiable hunger, while perhaps rooted in evolutionary survival mechanisms, is amplified by societal structures and cultural narratives, leading to profound individual suffering and collective instability. Greed, in its pathological form, is a relentless pursuit of an elusive satisfaction, a treadmill of acquisition that promises fulfillment but delivers only emptiness. Yet, the narrative of greed is not one of inescapable fate. The human capacity for self-awareness, for empathy, and for conscious choice offers a powerful counter-narrative. By understanding the subtle ways greed manifests within us, by cultivating practices of gratitude and mindfulness, by prioritizing intrinsic values of connection and growth, and by embracing the profound joy of generosity, we can begin to loosen its grip. The challenge lies in redefining our relationship with the concept of enough, moving beyond the endless pursuit of more to discover the true abundance that lies in contentment, purpose, and authentic human connection. Can humanity truly transcend its insatiable desires, or is the pursuit of more an eternal echo in the human heart? The answer, perhaps, lies not in a definitive end to desire, but in the conscious cultivation of wisdom to discern between healthy aspiration and destructive avarice. It lies in the courage to choose balance over excess, compassion over exploitation, and genuine well-being over fleeting acquisition. The psychology of greed, therefore, is not just a study of a human flaw, but a profound invitation to a more conscious, connected, and ultimately more fulfilling way of living.